It made me wonder if one of the motivations you had for writing this book was a little bit to humanize yourself, you know, to give people a little picture of the real Michael Moore.
No, I haven't. I didn't really think of that because I think I already am humanized. I think well, but I know what you mean, though.
Yeah.
Because the other side.
This is the choir.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
The other side does see me as the devil. I have been demonized and dehumanized, and I've often thought, geez, if some of them got to know me, I think they'd like me. They may not agree with me politically on everything, but I think if they would just watch one of my movies, you know, they've been told not to watch my movies. If they watch just one of them, they would instantly know that, number one, I love this country. Number two, I have a heart. And number three, they will laugh at some point during the movie. There is comedy and entertainment in these films. And so you're right. I mean, I think if anybody on the right, if a conservative would pick up this book and read it, they would be surprised, first of all, at how conservative I am myself. Not conservative in the way they would define it, but in the way that I live my life, is the way that you know, I think they would think that, well, that's an honorable way to live, the way he does that, the way that he functions as a human being. But I've never really wanted to be defensive about this, and I've tried. Listen, I mean, Roger Me came out 22 years ago. 22 years. So I've just tried to stay myself. I'm not, you know, what you see is what you get with me, and I've never really wanted to change that. But what you see is in this book, I guess, is really explained.
Oh yeah.
In many strange and bizarre incidents and ways.
Let's go to the other formative moment, which is an Elks Lodge speech that you had to give at age 17. I'd never heard this story before, and I think it's very revealing. Describe what happened.
Well, I got selected to go to Boys State, which I think they have this in most states. They have Boys State and Girls State in high school, where in your junior year they pick two students from two boys and two girls, and they send you to Sacramento, to the state capital, to play government for a week. And so there's 2,000 or 3,000 kids from around the state, and you elect a governor of California, a lieutenant governor, a state assembly, a Supreme Court, and the kids that usually get picked to go are the ones on student council, class presidents, the ones that are already kind of mini politicians in high school. You know who they are, right? And they would later become our real politicians.
Reese Witherspoon.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. You know, and I've always felt as an adult, had we just given them a few more swirlies in the restroom, you know, we would be spared so much of the crap that they do to us now in Sacramento or D.C. But anyway, so I got picked for some reason. I was not a class officer. I was not on student council. I got picked. The government teacher picked me. I went down to Lansing, Michigan, to East Lansing, to Michigan State. They put you in the dorms there. And I just sat there for the whole week. I locked the door. I refused to participate in anything except to go to the snack machine to get what she referred to in the introduction as this bag of potato chips, because they just invented this new potato chip called Ruffles. And I was just amazed at how they got those ridges in the chip. And I thought, with the hills in it, I thought I was getting more chip per chip. You know, so I love these things. And I would go down to the snack machine and get them. Near the end of the week, there was a poster on the wall by the snack machine, and it said, "Attention Boys Staters, speech contest on the life of Abraham Lincoln. Write a speech on Abe Lincoln and win a prize. Sponsored by the Elks Club." And I looked at that and I thought, that's interesting, because a couple weeks prior to that, my dad had gone to join the Elks Club. And at the top of the application, this is 1971, the top of the application is in Michigan now, not down south. It said, "Caucasians only." In the 70s. Those of you who are old enough to remember, even though the Civil Rights Act of 64 outlawed public discrimination in public accommodations and schools and all that, It did not outlaw it in private clubs or organizations. So even in the 70s, you could discriminate on the basis of race. And I saw that, I thought, geez, and I'm 17, I'm thinking, well, these hypocrites, how dare they sponsor a contest on the guy who freed the slaves, and they're doing this. So I just looked at that poster and I said, I'm going to write me a speech. So I went back to my room and I wrote this, typical 17-year-old. And I just like, well, young people are going to save us. I always believe this because I spoke at UCLA the other night, and the parents stood up. It was the parents were bringing in the students in for school starting and all this, well, how come young people didn't vote in 2010? The young people came out for Obama, but then they didn't show up and vote. And I said, well, that's because they're young. They shouldn't. They waited 2 years for something to happen, and it didn't happen. And when you're 18, you're like, Dad, you said you'd stop the war. We need young people. Because by the time we get our age, we learn to suffer fools every single day. They don't suffer any fools. All right, anyways, we'll talk about the election later. But I just want to get to
We will.
I'm sorry I got off on that. But so that was me, though. I saw that, went back, wrote a speech, showed up the next day to give the speech. There's nobody from the Elks Club there. They've hired a speech teacher from a public high school to be the judge. There's only 12 boys giving a speech. The other 11 talk about Lincoln and how he freed the slaves and won the Civil War. I stood up there and just hurled this barrage of insults at the Elks Club. And like 10 of the boys in the room are like this. And the one black kid in the room is like covering his mouth because he can't stop laughing. And at the end of it, the speech teacher stands up and says, and the winner of the contest is Michael Moore. And I'm like, whoa, okay. And then he says, now, tomorrow at the closing assembly, with the 2,000 boys gathered, you have to give the speech. That's the rules. I said, oh, no. Yes, you have to do it, and I'm not going to tell them before tomorrow what's in the speech. And I'm thinking, oh, thanks. Yes, let them be hit with it fresh. Next day I show up, they bring me up on the stage, I pass the governor, the real governor of Michigan, the lieutenant governor, all these dignitaries, and in the last seat as I'm walking across the stage is a guy with a hat with antlers coming out of the hat. And he's the chief elk. And he has no idea what's about to happen. He's minutes away from wishing he was a Rotarian. And so I unfurl the piece of paper. How dare the Elks Club besmirch the name of Abraham Lincoln? And I go on. And at the end of it, I finish by saying, they should be banned from this campus and to close. And I turn and I look at him finally for the first time, and his face is just beet red. His teeth look like chainsaws, He's just going to rip me one as soon as I'm done. And I just turn, he's holding the big trophy in his lap. And I just turned to him and I went, and I don't want your stinking trophy. And so I run off the stage, trying to get out of there. An AP reporter grabs me, and he's like, who are you? Where are you from? Why did you do that? And, oh my God, I'm from Davidson. I gotta go. Bye. And so I ran back to the dorm, locked the door. Every coast is clear. 2 hours, nothing happens. No Elks militia shows up. All of a sudden, there's a knock on the door. There's a phone call for you down at the end of the hall. So there's a payphone down at the end of the hall. So I go down there, and I pick up the phone, and this is what I hear on the other end. Yes, I am a producer from the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite in New York City, and we just read this thing came across the wire about the speech you gave and about the policies of private organizations that still have these racial policies, and we'd like you to come on TV. We're sending a crew over. And I'm going, no! I'm thinking, there's not enough Clearasil in the world that is going to let me go on TV. And I just said, I got to go, bye, and I hang up on him. So I run back to my room, The next day, we're packing up to leave. The phone is ringing now. More reporters, more networks, New York Times, all these people calling. And finally I get back home, and the U.S. Senator Phil Hart from Michigan calls. And they are going to have congressional hearings because they're going to introduce bills to stop racial discrimination in private clubs and organizations. And would I come to D.C. and testify? And I'm going, okay, I'll ask my parents. And of course, and so I never tell my parents, right? Because I'm not going down there. And within the year, a whole bunch of things happened. They were sued. They lost their liquor licenses. They got their tax-exempt status taken away from them. And finally, the Elks and all these other clubs, mostly men's groups, relented and changed their policies to stop the racial discrimination and in all their groups. And as I say in the book, it was a dangerous lesson to learn as a 16 or 17-year-old so early on that change can occur by actually doing very, very little. Not leading a big demonstration, not going on Walter Cronkite, just doing, I've thought from that day, if everybody just did a little bit, instead of waiting for a few people to have to do a whole lot and devote their whole lives and kill themselves trying to do these things, if everybody just did a little bit, the way change would so rapidly occur. And to learn that at such an early age, that this snowball got rolling in part, and I wasn't the only one working on this. I mean, there were other people working on this too, but that it got rolling simply because I wanted a bag of potato chips. That was the impetus for this, and so that has lived with me my whole life, and I was blessed to have that experience.
Now, there's so many other stories from the book that I think it's time to sort of move on from the book. But one thing I wanted to go back to, though, is that we think of you as this full-fledged filmmaker, and of course you were a trained journalist. You worked for a lot of different papers and Mother Jones editor and everything. But when you decided at the very beginning of your filmmaking career to do Roger and Me, you didn't know how to make a movie at all. You had no clue.
Not a clue. No, I knew nothing about making a movie, but I went to a lot of movies. I went to 4 or 5 movies a week. I went to a lot of movies. I went to everything when it opened on Friday and Saturday, and then during the week I would drive to Ann Arbor, which had all these great film societies, which campuses had back then, and I saw everything by Truffaut and Fellini and Bergman and Kubrick, and I was exposed to all of this, and I loved these films. I loved going to the movies. I loved the feeling of leaving a great movie. It was just exhilarating. And I hated documentaries. I just thought they were boring, and it felt like medicine, and I didn't need to go see an anti-nuclear film because I already was against it. Why would I go to a movie to reinforce my feelings about this? So. Well,
you took to it like a duck to water, obviously, and you also, other people were going to do the story about Flint and what was going on there, and GM, and you were sort of annoyed that they didn't make the movie. It was almost like you had to do it.
Well, I was at my newspaper. I had this newspaper that I founded called the Flint Voice. It was kind of an alternative newspaper like the LA Weekly, but in Flint, so it didn't look like the LA Weekly. But, one day I'm just there, and there's a knock on the door, and it's Ron Shelton, who made Bull Durham, and Roger Donaldson, who at that time had done an indie film, a great film from New Zealand called Smash Palace, and then went on to do a remake of The Bounty and a couple other films. And they had decided to make a Grapes of Wrath, a modern-day Grapes of Wrath film, but base it starting in Flint, auto worker families, then moving to Mexico, or not Mexico, but...
That was another story.
Oh, my buddies who worked in the shop, they said that was always their nightmare. They would have a recurring nightmare, and it wasn't only one guy that would have this, because factories would close, and they'd move you from Flint to South Bend, then from South Bend to Baton Rouge, and they felt that the logical thing that was going to happen is that they would all end up in a mass graveyard in Mexico. No, they were going to make this film, and they never made it for some reason. And then I had this idea of making Roger and Me, but I didn't know anything about making a movie. And these people had come from New York to make a film, a documentary, in the Flint area the year prior to that. And they had stopped by my paper, and they wanted to know if I could help them with information, and I did. And I went on the shoot with them, and I was really fascinated by how they shot this film. And it was by a guy who this was like one of the few documentaries that I liked, that I'd seen, called The Atomic Cafe. Mm-hmm. And what was astounding about this film was that they used humor to deal with a very serious subject. And I had not seen, this is 1982, I had not seen that in a documentary before. And it really got me thinking about how could I tell the story of Flint and GM, but with humor. So a year later, when I got the idea to make this film, after they were in Flint, I called them up in New York with this one person in particular, Kevin Rafferty, who made The Atomic Cafe, and I asked him if he would come to Flint and teach me how to make a movie, how to load film in the camera and use the Nagra and everything. And he said he would, and he wouldn't charge me, and he would come for a week. And he shot 60 rolls of film for like the first third of the movie. Then I went to New York. He taught me how to use a Steenbeck, and he taught me how to edit. And he became my teacher and my mentor. And he was just this amazing individual. And I had no idea who he really was. And I don't know if I should say here, because
you read the book.
Yeah, because it was such a shock that it like if you wrote it as fiction, it wouldn't it just wouldn't, you wouldn't believe it. But he actually and